Hello, I'm talking about emotional bleed, and I'm pretty sure none of you has any idea what I'm going to talk about. That's why I'm here. So emotional bleed is when we experience emotions in reality that come out of fiction. So let's consider this first. We have a dream, it's very vivid, we wake up and we still feel those emotions. I'm pretty sure many of you can relate to this, right? Now, the ones that know me know that I'm not talking about anything else besides role-playing games, so let's change this a little bit. Role-playing games bleed into our reality and not just dreams, and role-playing games are shared narratives. Now, you might think, okay, how is he gonna spin this one around to still fit with the theme? Let's call role-playing games not shared narratives, but lucid dreams. Lucid dreams are dreams where I'm aware that I'm dreaming. Lucid dreams are dreams some people actually can control, other people are just aware of the situation, and the same thing is true for role-playing games. I'm in a piece of fiction, but I know it's a piece of fiction, the same as when I have lucid dreams. I know it's a lucid dream. Now, emotional bleed is when the feelings, the emotions from that piece of fictions linger on in reality even when this piece of fiction is done. Now, some of you might say, oh yeah, I know this. When I watch a movie or when I read a book, I still feel these emotions. That's not what we're talking about, because this is called catharsis, okay? Now, there's a difference between emotional bleed and catharsis. Catharsis is more in the lines of empathy. Catharsis is when I read a book, watch a movie, go to a play, or watch a show of a favorite musician. When I feel these emotions, I'm not part of the play, part of the movie, or part of the band. I still have those emotions because I feel the emotions through empathy. When we talk about emotional bleed, I am part of the fiction. So there is no boundaries between me and my character in the fiction. At least that's how the emotional bleed happens. Now, there should be boundaries, right? Because I should be aware that I'm not the character in the game that I'm playing. But emotional bleed means these boundaries have eroded. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And many people play role-playing games specifically with the goal to actually feel those emotions. Now, on the one hand, we could have some positive emotions. I might play a hero in a game, and afterwards I feel really strong, I feel accomplished, I feel empowered, and that's something positive I can take away. On the other hand, I might feel heartbroken because the character in my story went through a breakup or something like that. Or I feel just overall sad, maybe even depressed because a part in the story just finished. Now, positive and negative emotions, none of those need to be bad for us. The key point here is that emotional bleed is something that we can't control in the moment it happens, but we can prepare for it. But before we go into managing the emotional bleed, let's think about why emotional bleed is so real when we talk about role-playing games and not necessarily other parts of fiction. So I mentioned that we feel catharsis when we watch a movie, right? But that feeling is gone relatively quick because we know it's not our emotions. Role-playing games, some games last for 1 or 2 hours. The emotional bleed is very minimum. But many role-playing games last for years. The first game that I ever played as a teenager lasted 5 years. And I played many, many adventures in that game. And I did the math. If we consider that I played at least once a week, I probably played more than once a week, and each session was about 5 to 6 hours, that's about 1,500 to 2,000 hours in those 5 years. And that's a lot of time that I, as a person, played a fictional character. And this is what This means, so I immerse myself into a role, into this dreamlike state of being this character. And I get emotionally invested because it's a long story and I'm shaping the story. I'm part of the story. The story moves forward because of me, because of my actions. And that's when the memory starts blurring, and that's when the emotional bleed starts tickling in. And that's not something that you plan on happening. That's something that just happens to you, and at some point you just realize, oh, I'm feeling super happy because my character did something really good. Or I'm feeling very, very sad, even though there's nothing wrong with me, but my character had something bad happening to them. And that's why we need to talk about managing this emotional bleed before it happens. And there are 3 things that I want to point out. First, of course, we need the awareness of emotional bleed, that it can happen, why it happens, and how it happens. We want to have safe spaces because we want to experience emotions in role-playing games, right? That's why we play it. It's not just we want to have a story, we want to feel the emotions. So we need to make sure that the emotions happen in a safe space. And we want to have some sort of debrief that comes after the game. Now, when we talk about awareness, it starts with understanding the game is not reality. Now, when I say that like this, you might say, yeah, that's easy. Well, we are sitting down with the dice, with the game book when we start the game. But as I mentioned, as you keep playing, those boundaries between the fictional world and your reality, they start eroding and you start feeling like your character. One way to address this would be naming those emotions. Specifically saying, oh, my character feels blah, blah, blah. Right? My character feels happy. My character feels sad. Because then I acknowledge it's not my personal feeling, it's the feeling of my character. And that helps me put this distance between character, fictional character, and reality in there. Once in a while, doing a self-check, just ask yourself, oh, is what I'm feeling what I am feeling, or is this my character feeling? So the awareness is part of understanding what emotional bleed is and how it happens. Now the next part is a little bit bigger. And those of you who were in my class for the role-playing unit or are currently in the English class that does role-playing, they know that we talk about safety tools, because safety tools are a way to prepare everyone at the table in a role-playing game for a safe space. And I always have the same safety tools, so I'm just going to go through this list real quick. Usually, before a game or a campaign, you would talk about the tone or the genre that you want to have. Now, this helps already with the emotional bleed to some degree, because if I say this is going to be in a certain genre, I put distance between myself and whatever happens in the game. The next thing is lines and veils. Lines are clear lines of topics or emotions that I do not want to cross. And I communicate that in the beginning of the game with everybody else so they don't cross that line. Okay? Veils are things that I might be fine being mentioned, but I don't want them to explore too deep. Now, lines and veils, this is the first part where we go into the emotional bleed, because as I mentioned, we want to feel emotions, but we don't want to feel all the emotion that are possible, right? Taking me as an example, and I said this many, many, many times, I don't do horror. I'm a chicken. I get nightmares when I play horror games or when I watch horror movies. So, for me, a line is no horror in my games, because I can't deal with it. That's too much for me. And everybody else around me needs to be aware of this. The next thing that I want to point out, the next safety tool is either the X card or the script change. Those are tools that you use while you are playing. When the situation gets too intense, that's when you pull out the X card and say, oh, stop, we need to take a break here. This is too much. And again, this is something that you decide, not your character, to make sure that the fiction stops here so you can put distance between you and the fiction. Check in with players, This is something that most people will say, oh yeah, that seems normal. Huh? If I see somebody at a table is distressed or looking weird, I check in. Is this making you uncomfortable? Is this because you are uncomfortable, or is this because you have too much empathy for your character, right? Both of those are valid questions. And then stars and wishes, that happens usually after the game as a way of preparing for the next game. What do we think was great in the game? What do we think we want to see more in the game? And this makes sense not just if I play short games, but usually if I play longer campaigns, because then I want to make sure that everybody at the table experiences exactly what they want to experience in the forthcoming games. And the stars and wishes are an excellent segue into debriefing. Debriefing is something that we often do. We are an IB school. We are aware of the word reflections. That's basically the same thing. Debrief means I check in with all the players after the game or after a session that was very, very intense to check how they are feeling. Stars and Wishes asks about the game. What do we want to see more in the game? The debrief asks about the person, the player. What did you experience? How did you feel about those things? Group reflections also help create a more safe environment because we build trust. And those debrief circles are great because we share. And because we share, we put distance between fiction and ourselves. Most people who experience emotional bleed experience it in situations where they finish the game and are left alone without somebody else. That happens a lot recently. Since the COVID pandemic, a lot of games switched online. And online, when the game is finished, most people just log off. And then they're sitting there all by themselves at home with all those emotions there. And that's when it's hard to put this distance between you and those emotions. That's why it's so important to talk afterwards. But this debrief is not just something you should do at your table. This is also something that you need to take off the table. Talk to other people. Talk to people who have no idea what you're talking about when you say role-playing games. It's an interesting experience because they will put distance between you and those feelings pretty quick. Now, the other thing is you can always look for advice online. There is podcasts, there's channels, there's articles about things like emotional bleed. One more thing that I have to say is, because I'm very big on safety and talking about emotional bleed and talking about the awareness makes games safer, if emotional bleed is something that interferes with your reality, you should seek medical health, because now we are talking about something that interferes with your life, that puts something between you and your reality, right? The fiction is not just creeping in, the fiction puts something between you and reality, and this is where we need to seek professional health. And this goes beyond just talking with your table. And with that, I want to say stay safe and thank you.